All right, friends, welcome back to another episode of Theology in the Raw. My guest today is Julia Malott. Julia is a transgender woman from Toronto, Ontario, who's determined to bridge the divide that's forming on transgender matters. I came across Julia on Twitter, where I watched a few videos that she made, one in particular regarding the whole pronoun debate, and I thought her perspective was extremely reasonable and thoughtful and nuanced. And then I watched another video and another and another. I'm like, man, Julia seems pretty awesome, and I want to get to know her. So that's what this podcast is all about. I know hardly anything about Julia before inviting her on the podcast, and so you're going to listen in on our conversation where we get to know each other. And I just had a wonderful, wonderful time talking with Julia about all kinds of stuff related to the very volatile and hotly debated transgender conversation. So please welcome to Theology in the Raw for the first time, the one and only Julia Malott. Julia, welcome to Theology in the Raw.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, here's a quick backstory for people that don't know. I was on Twitter, which is odd because I'm not on Twitter a lot these days. I kind of tweet and run, like I'll tweet something and then get out of there. But for some, like one of your videos popped up in my feed and I clicked on it, or maybe did somebody send it to me? Somebody might have sent it to me or tagged me in it. No, I think you might have tagged me in it. I don't know. Either way.
I think I did. I don't remember.
I remember watching, and I forget which one it was because I ended up watching several since then, but I was just so blown away at you, a trans woman, talking about a really contentious topic, but in a way that was extremely, for lack of a better term, just very reasonable and thoughtful and gracious. And I'm like, oh man, here's a person that is wanting to engage people who might disagree and have a good faith dialogue. And even the one on pronouns was so good. It was one of the best 5-minute overviews of the pronoun conversation because you're like, obviously I'm trans, I have my pronouns, whatever. But then the majority of it was trying to like maybe help other trans people not get so uptight when people maybe for whatever reason don't want to use your pronouns or they might mess up, and like don't put too much faith and stock in your pronoun. Like I was like, wow, this is really fascinating to hear a trans person talk like this. Like, so anyway, all that to say, I was like, I gotta have you on the podcast and just get to know you. So that's what we're doing here. We have no agenda here, just to have a conversation. So thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, absolutely. I so appreciate that. And it's weird to hear you talk about me and my videos that way, because I've been talking about you and your books that way for the past year. And I think what you've put together is fantastic. And the way that you frame this conversation is so important and so rare. And so I, have your book and I'm handing it out to people all over the place. And to hear you appreciate my work, I don't know, it's just an honor, to be quite honest.
Well, the honor is very, very mutual. And this is really cool because I'm going to get to know you live, and everybody else is going to get to know you that the people that don't already know you. So tell us your story. Well, where'd you grow up? Did you grow up in a Christian home? Would love to hear you talk about your experience with gender dysphoria and how you navigated what I'm sure is a really difficult and challenging journey.
Absolutely. So I grew up in a small farming town in Ontario in Canada. It's called Hanover, and it has 7,000 people. Actually, I think it has 7,500 people now. So that's how fast farming towns in Ontario grow over a 35-year period. And I grew up in a Christian household. So we actually started at a United Church of Canada. And when I was, I think, 7 years old, we went to the evangelical church in our town, and that was the Evangelical Missionary Church. So that was my upbringing. And I loved it. That was how I learned what community was. That was how I learned what faith was. And I found it immensely valuable in my life. And I was gender dysphoric. And that's something that I have always felt, but I don't like the way that lots of trans people sometimes characterize it. I think it's easy to almost over exaggerate sometimes the really young ages. Maybe that's just my own impression. But for me, I felt it when I was young, but I didn't know what it was because I knew that I was a boy. I knew that I had a penis. These things were very obvious. And I was a sciencey kid. So I knew that made me a boy, and it just was what it was. But I also knew that it didn't work. I didn't know how to socialize. I didn't know how to connect. It didn't feel right. And as I got older, that became stronger and stronger. And so when I was 12 or 13, I think 12 years old would have been when I discovered online what it meant to be transgender. of course, back then, this was the early 2000s. So this wasn't something that was available in schools. This wasn't something that was available in the health system. I had seen, I think, 4 counselors before grade 7 to try to figure out, why can't Jason have friends? Why doesn't Jason connect with people? What's going on? Why does Jason have so much anxiety? But we didn't even go in the maybe Jason's gay direction, let alone the maybe Jason's trans direction. And so by grade 7, I was becoming depressed enough and struggling enough that I kind of was able to zero in what I was feeling. And this was through a conversation at school. There was a kid who I was friends with named Jordan, and we were chatting in the playground once. And the conversation went towards talking about grass being greener on the other side and gender. And I kind of said, like, I think everyone feels that way though, right? Like, I feel like girls have it better and girls feel like boys have it better. And we all just kind of wish that we could experience the other side because it would make more sense, right? And he kind of looked at me and was like, no, I don't think most people feel that way. And that was when it clicked of like, maybe this is a me thing. Maybe there's something going on and this isn't just everybody's experience. And so I was a Googler back when I was 12, and I went online, and the resources were not good. These were blogs by individuals where they set up some stuff, but I read the descriptions and I thought, like, that is me. That describes everything I'm feeling. And so that was both a blessing and a curse in a sense. It was a blessing because I thought, oh, now I can have a framework to understand what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling. And there are other people who feel that way. But it was also a bit isolating because I was far too ashamed to share it with anybody. This was right around the time that gay marriage was becoming a very controversial issue in Canada. It wasn't yet legalized. That would happen in 2005. So a few years later. And at my church, that's a big issue. And we have speakers coming in talking about the problem of gay marriage and what this was going to mean. And I was sitting there thinking, well, if it's so bad to be gay, no one's even talking about me, whatever I am, but that must be really bad because we're not even talking about it. And so my coping mechanism was to hold an immense amount of shame. I internalized it and thought, I can't tell anybody this. I can't do anything about this. And these were real decisions I was making. When I was 14, I was a mathy kid. So I did the math of like, I could run away from home and I could transition and all these things, but I'd lose my parents and surgeries are very expensive. And I had like $300 in my bank account. And I thought, I can't do this. Or I could ignore it. And so that was what I did. And this is also when I got deeper in my faith, to be quite frank, because I thought I'm going to find solutions in religion. And so I was living a bit of a double life. My parents knew about none of this, but actually a quick funny story. So I had a computer in my bedroom, and my mom was very worried about me having a computer in my bedroom because church had taught that your teenage boy will just be looking at porn. That's what they're going to do if it's in your bedroom. But I had one. And for me, there was no porn. I had never once tried that. But what I was doing was reading journal articles all about transgender matters. And I was following, Ray Blanchard and Anne Lawrence and Michael Bailey and all of these individuals as they were coming up. I'm like reading their papers. I'm also diving in on the religious side. So if your book had existed, the People to Be Loved book back then, that's what I needed. But it didn't exist. So I bought a Greek Bible. I bought a lexicon and a concordance, and I was going through it thinking in my 14-year-old, full of myself brain, like, clearly nobody's asked this question before. I bet I can find the answer. I just have to look up these Greek words and it's all going to be clear that God does enable me to be trans, or that I'm not, or what's going on. And I was also preoccupied with the science because I thought that the trans narrative that often comes out is, well, trans people, that you're a woman in a man's body. And I thought, well, if that's true, then I should transition. But if that's not true, then I shouldn't. So I wanted to answer these questions. So I went through this period of getting no answers, but learning a lot of science and theology, and also building up a ton of shame because I was telling nobody. I was not dealing with any of it. And I carried that really till I was 28 years old. I met my wife to be when we were 16. She moved to my little town, and we started dating a year later when we were 17. When we were 18, I told her how I felt about my gender. She was the first and only person I told for many years. But I didn't do anything about it. And I kind of told her I wasn't going to do anything about it. I just internalized it and said, no, but I'm gonna be a man. I'm gonna live this way. And I don't have a lot of regrets in life, but for me, that's one of them, because I was a really horrible husband to her because I had actively chosen to not even deal with my own mental health issues and to deal with my own decision not to have happiness here. I kind of was staring happiness in the face and saying, rather than face this, I'm going to allow this shame bubble to build. And of course, shame can lead to narcissism, which I absolutely exhibited in my relationship. And that was the path that my life ended up heading. When I was 28 years old, then everything kind of came to a fruition. I had a earlier midlife crisis than many people have, but I didn't know how to cope with it anymore. And that was brought on by a lot of things, one of which was actually that I was feeling increasingly isolated in my friendships. Because when I was younger, when I'm in university, cross-sex friendships are still pretty normal. But by the time you're 28, people are getting married. And so a lot of those women who I had been friends with, they now had husbands, and it wasn't so appropriate for me to be connecting with them in the same way that I had before. And I had relational strains forming in my marriage, which were also being made worse by me ignoring everything and pulling away from that relationship. And it ultimately led to a suicide attempt, which led me to spend time in the psychiatric ward, which led to me actually talking about this with a psychiatrist, and started me down the whole path of transitioning. I'll pause there. Do you want me to keep going the way I'm going? Do you want to talk about anything?
Yeah. So I'm just writing down questions as you go, and we can circle back to probably several things here. But your on a scale of like 1 to 10, your gender dysphoria, what was it, like an 8, 9, 10? Did it kind of fluctuate? Did it get stronger as you got older? So I know it's kind of different for everybody, right?
Yeah, for me, it was always present. I wouldn't say stronger or weaker. But I would say that it was the most important thing in my life. It preoccupied me. And looking back now, I do wonder to the extent to which that was dysphoria and the extent to which that was my own obsession with my dysphoria. As I wasn't dealing with it, how much I made it more, because now I don't think about this that much. But back then, I thought about it all the time. I lived my life walking through this world, looking at everyone else thinking, you don't know my pain, you don't know my struggle, you don't know what I'm feeling. And that was not healthy, I don't think.
Is that how, does it create kind of like a looping effect in a sense, like where the dysphoria spikes these kind of, like social anxiety, for lack of better terms? You're walking around in a very gendered world, and then that causes you to think about your dysphoria, and then that exacerbates your dysphoria. Is that an accurate way of kind of?
I think it is, yeah. And that's something that will come a bit later in my story, but I realized that I had more than one thing going on. Sure, I had gender dysphoria. I also had this shame bubble that I wasn't dealing with. And I also had a problem with authenticity, because I was hiding everything that I was feeling and experiencing. And I'm still trying to separate those and say how much was what, because all of those, I think, led to a very unhealthy mental state. And while the dysphoria existed and still can be present, I'm not convinced that was the biggest problem that I had. I think the bigger problem was we live in a very gendered world, and I wasn't able to even have those conversations. When I was shoehorned into, you have to do this because you're a man and this is what a Christian man does, I couldn't really even have that conversation because I wasn't telling people how I felt. So I don't have that answer. It's not knowing how it could have been different, but I certainly wonder for myself how much of it was the dysphoria versus everything else.
That's interesting. I have other things I want to come back to, but yeah, go ahead and continue your story. You're 28 years old, and pick it up there again.
Yeah. So I'm 28 years old. And I reached a point where I ultimately decided to attempt to transition. And this was over about an 8-month period where the world just felt dim, is the best way I can describe it. I was suicidal the entire time, but not that manic suicide as though like I need to stop from jumping off a cliff. More like I just looked at the world and said, but there's nothing here for me anymore. I've done it all. This isn't a place that I want to be. And that brought me to a place of saying, why don't I try transition? Because maybe that will help you. Maybe that will solve these things. And if it doesn't, then at least you'll know, and you can still, quite honestly, kill yourself as I wanted to do. And so I started to go down that path, and I started to explore. And the spoiler alert, my life completely turned around and I'm much happier now. But what I do question too is how much of it was the transition and how much of it was the dealing with the authenticity and the shame, because I do think that those were huge parts of it. And by choosing to transition, I dealt with those. Maybe there's a path where I didn't need to transition and I could have just dealt with those. I didn't find that, but I certainly wouldn't want to suggest that it couldn't have gone that way.
Okay.
As things did go for me though, so I started to transition. My wife and I did separate, which was more a result of my behavior in our relationship before and leading up to that point in my life. I was not a good husband. I was not treating her well. I didn't even know it at the time, but looking back, that was a bigger part of it than my transition itself. And I ended up in, I think, the mental space that a lot of trans people, and especially trans women, end up, where this transition is affirming. You're finding some relationships that are helping you to deal with what you've been experiencing, but you're still living in a very victimized place where I can blame the world for not accepting me, for not seeing me as I want to be seen, or for not structuring itself in such a way that I can do and be, how I am maybe seeing myself. And I was in that space for a while. And then I was so fortunate because just at the beginning of COVID, I work in software, and I was given access to a very high profile career and life coach. So for a year, I had access to this individual, and I could meet with him as much as I wanted to. So we'd have these one-on-one calls, and he made it clear from the beginning that this was kind of work career coaching. He's like, but work life, it's all overlapping. So like, we're going to talk about your marriage. We're going to talk about anything you want to talk about, because you're one person and they all play into it. And for him, he really drove into me the ideas of integrity and authenticity. And I read probably 60 books that year with him. I read Alan Watts. I read Dale Carnegie. I read all kinds of stuff. And I realized through that I had an authenticity problem with others. And I knew about that. And I thought transition is great. And I'm feeling better because now when I walk into a room, people know this thing about me. They know how I'm feeling. And that was good. But I also realized that in the process of transitioning, I had developed an authenticity problem with myself, because I was now also living not reality. When you transition, at least for me, what made me feel better was saying, I'm a woman, I'm female, I'm just like everybody else who's born female. And that's not true. But I would tell myself that because it felt good. And what kind of clicked this for me was the pronoun piece that I know you touched on earlier here, that I have so many loving and lovely people in my life, and these people want to affirm me and they want to make me feel good. So when I told them that I was transitioning, they call me she, her, because they know that's what I'm looking for. And then they make a mistake because my voice is low, or because I'm pretty tall, or because I have masculine facial features, or because they knew me as Jason for 30 years. And when they would do that, when someone who loves me and cares for me is out and says he instead of she, it would rip me apart. And it would put me in this spot where for days I'd be thinking about it and focused on it. And as I worked through this with my life coach, I realized that's because I'm not living in reality, because I'm pretending that I am biologically female, and I'm pretending that everyone sees me that way. And when they say that, they've accidentally broken that bubble for me and shown me that even though they love me, even though they want me in their circles, they do see that I'm biologically male. And that was tough to wrestle with. But when I was able to get through that, I reached a point of saying, what if I embrace reality? What if I embrace what I just described, that I am biologically male, that I am presenting in a more feminine way, and that people in my life love me? Those are all principles that are so powerful. And by holding on to that, I don't have to be hurt by it, because that's just the truth.
This is fascinating. And I want to give a caveat. I'm almost certain you're going to agree with that. Your story is one story. And, your perspective, we can't, especially for Christians that aren't trans, they meet one trans person, especially if a trans person is maybe affirming some things that they agree with, like, see, this is what every person should say and think, whatever. So I just would, this is your story, and that's all it is. But for you, I'm hearing you say that accepting the biological reality that you are male was actually more liberating for you, rather than the opposite, to try to say, I am a female and I want everybody else to affirm that. That actually had a reverse effect when you were kind of wanting everybody else to affirm that, you to affirm that, but accepting the reality of your biology was actually more liberating. Is that what you're saying? Or
Absolutely. And it was a mountain to get over. I don't want to diminish and sound like it was easy, but it's kind of like accepting your weaknesses. It's accepting that sometimes we're not the best singer, or we're not the best runner, and we might love those things. But if we pretend that we are a world-class singer when really we're mediocre, we're going to be hurt when people don't recognize us as being a world-class singer. And if I accept that I'm not biologically female, and people are going to see that, then that's better than if I think I am biologically female, or if I were to think I am the most attractive person on the planet. Like, people don't treat me like I'm the most attractive person on the planet, and that's okay. I'm still lovable, but I need to be at peace with that.
That's interesting. Oh, I had another question that escaped me. I do want to get to the pronoun. Wow, I have so many. Yeah. I noticed that you freely used your birth name, Jason, which most trans people say your dead name. And in most circles that I'm from, I mean, that's kind of really a big no-no. Like you don't ever mention that, but you freely use it. Is that kind of for the same reason that for most of your life you would say, I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like you were Jason, like that's part of
Yeah.
your, yeah.
Well, I was, and I still am. I still am too, in a certain way. I do that for a few reasons. One of those is because I've come to a place where I'm okay with it, so it just doesn't really bother me.
Okay.
Another reason is out of respect for people in my family, like my parents and my sister. I know a few years into my transition, my sister once asked me, like, do we have to get rid of all of our old photos and stuff and put those away? And to me, I just was like, no, we have these lovely memories and we have all these things, and that happened, and we should cherish that and we should embrace that. And I was Jason with them, and that's fine. So I can accept that. And then the third piece of this, and this will kind of come into my where we're going to go here, but I now spend most of my time in very gender critical circles. I've moved into a lot of religious circles, but I've also moved into a lot of the radical feminist circles that are very trans negative. And
Can you explain so gender critical and radical feminist? Yeah. I know what you're saying, but for those who don't know, yeah, how would you describe that?
Absolutely, yeah. So gender critical is a tough word because people use it in lots of ways. I consider myself gender critical in many respects, in terms of not necessarily accepting the idea of detaching sex and gender as two disparate concepts. But in this case, I'm using it more to refer to what would be classically known as a TERF, or a trans exclusionary radical feminist. So these are the individuals who have almost made it their life mission to exclude trans women from everything. And they're at the forefront of that fight. Often it comes from a postmodern mindset of men have oppressed women and trans women are men. And so they are kind of our oppressor, mocking our form and taking our form. And it can go to some really nasty places online and in real life sometimes. And I spend a lot of time in these circles very intentionally, because it's almost a mission place for me, in a certain sense, of how do we bring these conversations together? How do we find ways to be able to connect and still find where we get along, rather than be so divisive? And so as part of that, I usually bring up my dead name Jason fairly early on, because one thing I've realized is that people who want to hurt me are going to look for ways that they can use weapons. And if I create something like, you can't call me he, him, or you can't use Jason, well, I can't stop them, and they have a way to get at me. But if I put that out there and say, this is true, so it's the same sort of thing of accepting reality, it takes away that angle that they can use to kind of go after me.
So you're in ongoing dialogue with also, I'll use the term gender critical feminists. So how has that gone? I mean, I'm sure there's a wide range of different people that are probably very, very loving and accepting of you. They just might not agree with certain things, and other ones that might be much more hostile. Is that true? Is there kind of a wide range of personalities in those contexts?
Totally. I mean, you can't have a conversation with someone who doesn't want to have a conversation with you. So that's my limitation. And there are certainly individuals out there who are actually hateful and who have no interest in connecting with me. So they exist, but I don't find that's most people. I look at the divisions that we have in society right now on all fronts, including this one, and someone might make a rude, mean comment, but this person has a family. This person has kids. This person's capable of love. And I see what they post, and I think that's coming from a place of maybe misunderstanding. Probably it's coming from hurt, maybe fear, but there's something behind it there. And when I approach those individuals, I'm not looking to change their opinion. I'm not looking to debate. I'm looking to dialogue, to explore that and say, what's going on for you? I want to hear it. And usually I find that is received incredibly powerfully. So a few weeks ago, I made a video about an individual who I don't know. This is someone who's gender critical and has quite a large following. She had made a pretty strong post about a particular trans celebrity and their transition. And it was strongly worded, but it was also about the way that their spouse and them had separated. And it was stuff I could relate to, because it was kind of very similar to my life. And I thought, wow, this is a powerful moment. So I made a video and kind of didn't criticize her, but I talked about my experience there and how that played out with my wife and I. And this individual, I tagged her, and she almost blocked me. She said she saw the tag and thought, oh, trans person gonna block. And then she watched my video and she responded thoughtfully. And then I responded thoughtfully.
Can I ask who it was?
Yeah. So her name is Audra Fasinelli.
Oh, I don't know her. Okay.
She's in the States, and all where this leads to is we're now friends. We recorded a podcast together. I'm going to be putting out next week, and we continue to chat. I'm going to go see her sometime this summer, hopefully, and we've developed this friendship. And there's lots of things we disagree on, but we didn't even get into that in our conversation. It's more like, yeah, leading up to it, she told me she hasn't had a conversation with a trans person in years. She told me that she has yet to encounter a trans person who she doesn't perceive as a narcissist. And so she's created this space because that's been her experience. And then I'll talk to trans people and they'll say similar things about those gender criticals because we've created this nasty discourse. And I'm sitting here thinking these are all people capable of love. We just have to be able to talk. And I'm comfortable taking that first step. I'm comfortable saying, I'm gonna assume the best in you. I want to come forward, and I get burned occasionally, but not very often. Not very often, I find.
And I listen to a wide range of people, and so naturally I would listen to some gender critical feminists, and the ones that I've read books on and listened to, they like it sounds like your friend. Like there might be some, there absolutely is some maybe ideological differences, but I haven't. Again, the ones that I've read and listened to and even interacted with would say I have no problem with somebody living their life trans. Like I have no problem with a trans person as a person. I'm going to give them honor, dignity. They should get housing, and they would have. I think the two things that I see is I don't want to be forced to kind of deny biological reality. Even if somebody else does, I'm not. I think there's the female body is kind of essential for the definition of what a woman is. And if somebody wants to live differently, that's totally fine, but don't force me to embrace certain ideas that I don't agree with. And then also, obviously, there's, questions around, trans women in female sports and, some social environments, bathrooms or whatever. And that's where, there might be some differences as well. But in terms of just like maybe honoring the actual person, I don't, someone like a J.K. Rowling would be a classic example. She's been labeled a turd and all this stuff. I don't see personally like any hate coming from anything she's said. Maybe she's gone about it, maybe a little in a salty way or whatever. But that's just kind of the nature of social media. I think people say things really, whatever. But I would since I brought her up. She's a well-known figure, obviously. But I don't. Do you sense like hate or transphobic vibes from her, or I don't know?
Well, that's been part of my journey. When I was going through my transformation here at the same time as she was coming out to speak about this. So when she first started posting stuff and wrote her essay back in maybe 2020, whenever that was, I read it and thought, oh, she's so horrible. This is so bad. She's so hateful. That was my take then. And then I've been working through stuff. And it was just maybe 2 months ago, as I'm in the circles I am now, and I've been actually following her, I thought, I'm not so sure. So I went back and read the essay again. And I was like, oh no, like, I could write this essay now. Like this could be something I would write. I don't see it the same way as I used to. I do agree with what you said about maybe not always going about it in a way that promotes love, because there are a lot of people who follow her who do take it to a hateful spot. Like when you describe the gender criticals you've read, those are the people I'm connected with. Those are the people I love. They're my friends. I stay with them when I go into different cities and kind of, get together to work on things. But there are those who take it way further, who really do have disdain and contempt for me as an individual, not for the issues and the ideology. But it's not most people, right? Like I truly believe that there are hateful people on all ends of our political spectrum, but they're minorities. They're deeply hurting. I still think they can be helped. I just, maybe if they're not interested in coming to me with good faith to have conversations, there's not much I can do, but I still have hope for them.
Would you say, I'm probably throwing you a softball here, but your newer perspective on wanting to have good faith dialogue, of accepting certain biological realities, is that produced more happiness in your life? Like, were you less happy when you were kind of needing maybe people to agree with everything you were saying and doing?
Absolutely. Well, the beautiful thing about trying to accept your strengths and your weaknesses and your limitations and your reality is that people can't hurt you. I know, but before we got onto this recording here, you talked about some of the hate you've seen come towards me just on when you shared my video. And
it's brutal. Yeah.
the reality is the hate that I get comes in a few forms, one of which is just saying things like, you're a man. And I'm like, well, you're not wrong. So like, it's not, I don't really view it as hate. It's just, it's kind of rude. Like, why are you mentioning it here when we all know that? But it's fine. It's reality. So it doesn't get to me. Or they'll say things that aren't positions that I hold. They'll say things like, well, you're a groomer and you want to convert our kids and stuff, at which point that's kind of why I have my videos. I can be like, well, actually, here's a video where I spoke against that. So that isn't my position, but you're right. That's a big concern. And we should do something about that. So it kind of helps me navigate that by sticking to reality in a certain sense.
That's interesting. Yeah. You kind of steal the power away from the things people can wield to try to hurt you. Are you still, what's your faith right now? Do you still identify as Christian, or and if it's personal, I don't need to know. I'm just curious. Like,
no, totally. I've had a lot of conversations about that. So actually, I would like to, before I answer that question, tell a bit more of my story, because it will lead into that.
Yeah.
So I'm going through this kind of transformation, getting my head to a much better spot. I then had a daughter, and I had my daughter at 14 years old because she's my adopted daughter. She's actually my partner's little sister, but there's some issues in that household, and so we ultimately were able to get custody over her. So she came to live with me, and my wife, she's chronically ill. She actually got sick with COVID at the beginning and had the long haul COVID symptoms. So she was in bed for 2 years. And this is right at the time that I got my daughter. So I was the primary parent, and we've become very close in the years that I've had her. And when she was going back to in-person school, she was going to be going to a big city high school. Her birth family lived in a small town. So nothing like where I live now, but she was going to go to a big city high school with 2,000 people. And she's very excited. And I was worried. I was nervous because I thought, are people not going to like her because she has a trans parent? And is that going to cause a rift between her and I? Because I thought about when I was in high school, and we would have just made fun of, someone's transparent. We wouldn't have been comfortable with that. And so I was worried. She goes to high school, and I quickly learned that we live in a very different world now. I live in a very liberal city here in Canada. And I was cool. I was cool being trans because that is very in a certain way. And so at first that felt awesome. I'm like, wow, this is great. And then as I watched in that first year she was in school, I saw a lot of the downsides of how we're hitting a point now where it is so cool to be trans or gay or have these identities that it's being adopted for individuals who maybe aren't dysphoric. And I notice how it's leading people down paths that can lead to regret and outcomes that's certainly not what anybody wants. And I was wrestling with these ideas at the same time that a teacher named Carolyn Berjowski did a presentation at our school board. So she was a teacher almost at retirement, and she presented to the board about some books that were in the library that she was concerned with. And we've all heard about the books, but her presentation was quite mild. It was a few books that she said, these seem just too not age appropriate. They're just, these kids this age maybe shouldn't receive this message. She brought up one book that was glamorizing transition. It kind of spoke about it in a very, this is cool, this is fun, I'm finding myself, but maybe didn't talk about some of the risks and complications, which, having been through a surgical transition, I believe are really important to talk about as part of the picture. And in this presentation, she was shut down. The chair cut her off. They went to the newspaper, the board did. She was called transphobic. She was canceled in Canada at this point. And it's ultimately led to 2 lawsuits that are going through this year. One is a defamation suit and one is a judicial review. And this all happened in a school board election year for us. And I knew that was an election year. And the moment I saw her presentation, I thought, this is going to be bad, because we're going to get the extremes from both sides coming out to our school board, and we're going to have the same thing we've seen play out in lots of American cities, which we did. And I decided to run as well as part of that, because I am trans, so I understand that side. I do get progressivism, and I get the needs of transgender people and the importance of maintaining dignity and respect. But I also understood her side. I thought she raised some valid points, and I think that we can do better in promoting acceptance, or we can do better in fostering acceptance of identity rather than fostering promotion, which is very much what I'm seeing in the system. So through this, I met Carolyn. She's now one of my closest friends. I was actually recording with her. I was chatting with her right before I got on the call with you here. And I met a whole bunch of other candidates who were running on both sides of this divide. And through that, I met one particular individual named Christina Fernandez. And she's an evangelical Christian, and she was running for the school board as well. And as we got connected, she talked about her own faith journey and how she was reading your book, People to Be Loved, that had been given to her by her pastor, because she had questions for herself of how does she reconcile her faith with, in this case, it was about homosexuality, not about transgender individuals, but the whole complex world. So we actually read it together. We kind of went through it and discussed it. And that led me down this journey where I am now, where I'm speaking publicly, where I'm making videos, and really trying to, in a sense, devote my life to what's now my mission field, which is bridging the gap, which is saying, how do we have the political conversations we need to have? How do we live in this world together, even when we might disagree? Because what I've seen on our school board, what I've seen in our politics has gotten so divisive and so just non-functional. And I don't think I'm answering your question at all about faith. I've taken this in like an entirely different direction.
You keep going, but I do want you to come back to the faith question if you're fine. But this is all great stuff, though. This is super helpful.
Cool. Yeah. So it's gone down this crazy journey I never saw for my life, where people just aren't able to talk about this stuff, and people are assuming the worst in the other side. Christina and a lot of the other people in her group, they've never met a trans person, because trans people are on the other side from them, and they all assume the worst of each other. And I could come in and say, I agree with so much you have to say, and I'm trans, and maybe we don't agree on stuff too, but we also agree on lots of things, and maybe we can work together. And that has led to moving beyond just my city. So I talk at a lot of school boards across the province at this point, and I'm also doing some stuff at the provincial level, because we're just not able to have these conversations.
Yeah. So your faith now?
So my faith, yeah. So in the talks I had with Christina, so when I met her, we had this idea. We said, what if we record every conversation that we have? Because we didn't know each other yet. So from the time we met, we only talked on video or audio, so we could record it for 45 hours or so of conversation. So we get together and go through this journey where we challenge each other and explore stuff. And faith came up a lot throughout that. My own faith journey was, in university, I started working at a local church. It was called the Meeting House. It's a big church here in Canada, and they operate out of movie theaters. You know the Meeting House? You know
Bruxy, right?
Bruxy KV. Yeah, I know Bruxy pretty well. But so we operate out of movie theaters, and the main church is in a different city. So in our city here, we had 2 movie theaters that every week we would get the sermon kind of broadcast into us. So I was in charge of logistics. So I made sure that all of the technical equipment was set up, and the band was set up, and all of our kids' rooms were set up, and all the volunteers were scheduled, and all of these things. And I loved it. And that was my community for many years as I was struggling with dysphoria. And I had a breaking moment in 2013. I'd been working there for about 3 years at that point. And my community was a lot of 60 to 80-year-olds. We had these home churches that we would partake in. And for whatever reason, my girlfriend, but she became my wife at the time, we found a home church we loved that everybody was 60 to 80 years old, except for us. So we're 20 and they're all way older. And it was wonderful because, the wisdom you get from people who are in a different age bracket than you. And these people kind of guided and, shepherded us in terms of understanding life. And they were some of the kindest and most genuine people I knew. And then in 2013, Bruxy did a teaching about homosexuality. And he did what he called the third way approach at that point. It was kind of a message of, this doesn't need to be such a big deal. Maybe this isn't as important as the church has made it. What if we take a third way of love, rather than being so focused on whether this is right or wrong? And both because I was in this particular home church and because I was on staff, I got to see the conversations that were happening in our church then, of some of these people who had been kind of my role models, my elder role models, leaving our church and being very upset that we could dare even talk. And behind closed door, they'd tell me how they really felt about how disgusting these people were, that they would ever sleep with someone of the same sex or various things. And kind of like my childhood, it brought me back to that place of if that's them, they're not even trans. We're not even talking trans. We're just talking gay. If that's them for what they are, then what am I? And what would you think about me if you knew? And it kind of just built up the shame that was always there. And for me, that was probably the biggest thing that rocked my faith, was how do I reconcile this? How do I reconcile that these people who are so loving and so genuine and have been my community feel this way? And I went through a few years then that I was still at the church, but I was doing the motions. I was more and more skeptical and angry, but it was my community. It was my family. when I transitioned, I had left the church for about a year and a half. My wife and I had moved to a different city, and we ultimately just didn't really find a new church because we both weren't sure what to do about it. And then I transitioned, and now I'm where I am now. So I have not gone to a church for 6 years. I don't think I've stepped foot in a church for 6 years. But I've thought about it a lot. And what's held me back now has been valuing authenticity in a way that I didn't used to. I don't know how I feel about God. I don't know how I feel about Jesus. And before, when I worked at the church, I was such an inauthentic person. It didn't matter. I could work there and be on staff and just say the right things and do the right motions and know that I was unsure how I felt. Now I can't do that. I don't know how to walk into that church and not be authentic, but it also feels disrespectful. To me, it feels disrespectful to do that when I don't know where I stand. And I've considered it actually a month ago. So I have the craziest conversations now, and they're so wonderful. And 2 different people in one day invited me to a particular church in my city. One was because her daughter was being baptized there, so she invited me out to it. And another, just out of the blue, she's like, "You should come to church this Sunday." They both go to the same church. And I thought, oh, if there's such a thing as a sign, this is a sign. And these are both, anti-woke individuals. One of them is another trustee candidate, and one of them is someone who is quite cruel to trans people online. She once posted that she refuses to use pronouns for any trans person except for Julia Malott, is what she posted on Twitter once. So these are characters, but wow. And I took that seriously, and I really wanted to go. So I actually emailed the church, because I kind of said, look, I have these invitations. I'm trans, because I know this church is also it's a pretty far right church. This is the one in our city that was shut down by the government for refusing to close during COVID. So they're pretty far right. And I thought, I've been invited. I would love to come. I'm not looking for acceptance. I'm not looking for anybody to, anything like that. But I just want to know, where do you stand in terms of, would you let me in the building? I don't want to show up and be walked out. I don't want to create a spectacle. If you think this is powerful, if you take an approach like you describe in your book, if you take an approach where you would welcome me and you would have me, and you think that could be beneficial for your community to experience me, I would be there. But I don't want to cause something that you're not prepared to receive. Yeah. And they didn't respond to my email. And I've kind of been sitting ever since. I've been like, maybe I should follow up, but then do I have the guts to do that? I don't even know if I can handle that. So I've kind of, I don't know how to answer your question, because I'm in an exploring place. I don't know what my future holds.
You answered it as honestly and authentically as anyone could. So thank you, honestly, for your just being so vulnerable and honest with where you're at. That's really admirable. Wish more Christians had that kind of honesty about where they're at. And that's unfortunate. I mean, because I'm not hearing you say, I want to show up at your church and become a member and a leader and a deacon. You're saying, I just want to show up to the building, and how would that go? Yeah, that's I'm sorry they haven't responded. I hope they do, because that silence can speak a lot, and that's unfortunate. You mentioned, I've got a list of thoughts and questions that I would love, and I know some of them, but some of them I have no clue what you would say to it. You mentioned kind of in passing, I think offline and online, about teens and the whole trans conversation, because that's a big topic right now, especially in the state. Well, I would say in Canada as well, right? That you obviously, you have this explosive numbers of teens, especially biological females, identifying as trans, and many of them are pursuing, social, hormonal, or even surgical transitioning when they're of age. What are your thoughts on that? I sense that you were somewhat concerned about that. Can you expand on what are your thoughts on kind of this? Well, I'll just leave it at you. Yeah.
Absolutely. So another part of my journey that I haven't explored yet was with my mother. So my mom is a very strong evangelical Christian. That's where she's been for a long time in her life. And so this was very difficult for her when I came out. And as we did some Christian counseling together for a little while, and as we worked into kind of starting to find some common ground and some places where we could connect, we talked about reading some books. But she drew a line of saying, I will not read non-Christian books. She just doesn't really read them, because she's to be honest, I think a little bit afraid of her faith being challenged. So she wasn't going to read any book about trans matters that wasn't Christian based. And Embody didn't exist at that point, so we couldn't read that one. But she sort of said this to me. I said, great, well, let's read the Christian ones together. So I know we read Mark Yarhouse's book. Okay. That was kind of the main one that I got, and then a few others. And in the end, my mom never read them. She couldn't bring herself to do that. So that was hard for me, but I read them because I love reading. So I read Mark Yarhouse's book, and I know he describes kind of these different frameworks for how you might kind of conceptualize of what's going on. And one was the disability framework, and one was the diversity framework. And that stuck with me. That's been really formative in terms of how I view this, that I perceive myself as having a disability of some kinds. I don't know why I feel this way. I can't fully explain it, but for whatever reason, whether it's biological, whether it's purely psychosocial, for whatever reason, I feel the way that I do, and it causes distress. And I think it's compassionate to reduce stress. And I think that there's a lot of things there, but I do think it's important to hold on to the idea that something is not right. Something is not right. And that's what we're trying to do, is resolve that, unlike the diversity perspective, which is to say kind of the find an identity in whatever feels fulfilling, and that's empowering. I don't accept that. I think that transitioning is dangerous. Transitioning is expensive. Transitioning has a lot of downsides. Transitioning might leave you disappointed. It certainly will leave you infertile. There's a lot of reasons to not encourage it. If a kid can prosper and if a kid can prosper and do well and not transition, that's the future I want for them. If any kid comes and says, I'm gender dysphoric, I feel like I need to transition, I want to see a world where we see if we can avoid doing the transition. And if we can't, I think it's a better solution than the many negative ways it can go. And so that's always been my position. And that's where we used to be as a country. 2017 for us is when it changed in Canada, because there's a center called CAMH, which is where you go through for all of the kind of overseeing surgeries and stuff in Ontario. And they had a transformation in terms of their leadership. Ken Zucker, the researcher who had led it, disappeared, and some new individuals came in. And we've gone to a place where you can't question and you can't challenge. So if it does come to you now in school and says, I feel this way, the teachers can't question it. And they don't even tell the parents, in fact, if the kid doesn't want their parents to know, which means the parents may not know, which means the parents can't work with the medical community to figure out what the best path forward is. But even if they did in Ontario, the medical community can't question it, because we don't allow that either. So it's kind of, you have to just affirm for the sake of affirmation. And I do think that is damaging. And when you described rapid onset gender dysphoria and a lot of that, I've seen it. I suspected it in those early days when I saw it at my daughter's school and thought, this doesn't seem right. Like when I was a kid, they said maybe 1 in 2,000 to 1 in 5,000 people are trans. We don't really know. And that was probably underreported because it wasn't well talked about, but 39% of my board now identifies as LGBT, and 39% is a lot. And I see it with the excitement and I had one trans person in my city who described to me, I'm not gender dysphoric, but I'm gender euphoric. I was okay, but now I feel even better. And I'm like, that you're describing it the way we describe drugs at this point. Like this is a very different world than the way I would look at it with that disability framework. So the other piece I would say that plays into it for me in my position is I'm now very, very involved in this community. I have this wonderful network of support around me, including the doctors and the researchers and the psychotherapists who are working across this continent really on these matters. And so I've been connected with the detransitioners. I know them personally now, and I understand that harm can be caused when you transition somebody who this isn't right for, who will regret it. And so while I certainly have empathy for individuals who might benefit from transition, I have to hope we can find a path forward that doesn't catch everybody else in the crossfire, because transitioning kids who are going to regret it is bad. Not transitioning kids who desperately need it may also be bad. There's got to be a solution that looks at both of these sides.
Right. No, that's really helpful. As you can gather from my books, I try to just avoid the polarized perspectives. Usually they just misrepresent the other side. It becomes so heated. Nobody's trying to understand each other. So I'm constantly trying to say, or, the phrase, I'm constantly trying to steel man the other view that I find initially, like, I don't think I agree with that, but what is the best case for that? And when it comes to, so I've tried that in my books, especially on sexuality and gender, I'm entering into a conversation that is distant from me. I don't have these personal experiences, so I have to work extra hard to try to get inside the mind and heart and bodies of people who are holding viewpoints that I don't initially agree with. I'm like, okay, well, what is the best case for this? Having said all that, and I've got, several friends that, like you, who, if we can be friends now,
Yeah,
who have
absolutely.
transitioned, and they're like, this was kind of like a last ditch effort to kind of survive. I know that can be thrown around too haphazardly. This is a way to survive, but for them, it was an excruciating decision that was so difficult, and for a few people that I'm thinking of in particular, like it did alleviate this debilitating distress. And that doesn't answer the ethical questions of transitioning, but it certainly is relationally, is impactful. And so here's what I'm trying to say. Like, when it comes to the teen conversation, this explosive rise in numbers, and I think seeing people so quickly diagnosed with gender dysphoria and teens. I have 4 teenage kids, and I'm around teenagers all the time. Teenagers are teenagers. My gosh, like they're one day they're this, another day they're that, and they are deeply impacted by their social environment. I know that's a huge debate, and is there a social contagion in gender identities? And I'm here's what I want to say. I am deeply even trying to see the other side. What's the argument, counter argument? I'm still very deeply concerned with how youth culture is in some cases, maybe in many cases, kind of glamorizing transitioning or different gender identities. It's one thing to kind of, like, in my high school days, we had different groups and trends, and the emos and the jocks and the hicks and the neo hippies, and they go out in their VW buses and smoke weed and during lunch or whatever. And like, we had all these kind of groups and personalities, but none of it was medicalized, right? Like, none of this was, you could become an emo and you might have some extra piercings or something that when you're 42 you might regret. I don't know, but this is just different, that you're faced with these irreversible surgeries, that it does seem that there is a growing number of regret happening, especially in among females in their early 20s who are now like, golly, like, I made some decisions and my medical caretakers didn't seem to be really looking after me and for my holistic well-being. So that's where I'm coming from. I'm very concerned about what's going on with the teen conversation, even though I have tried to understand, like, okay, what's the other side and so on. So do you think, okay, so you mentioned detransitioners. Do you see, and I don't think there's a lot of hard data on this, but do you see a growing number of detransitioners or transition regret, especially among younger people, than there ever has been before? Or
Yeah, I think it's a complex question because it's changed so quickly. The rapid onset, we're talking 2017 onward, so we're not talking a long period to know where it's going to go. But I think we've seen some of it. I think it's also a challenging conversation because, are you talking about desisting or are you talking about detransitioning? And to describe those, desisting is usually referring to people who start down a path. They maybe take on an identity and then they go, maybe not. And detransition is like, you did something.
You're in the process of defining it, I guess. But yeah, so what's the difference between desisting and detransitioning?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So desisting is going to be you kind of claim an identity. I am now trans, or I am a this, or I'm a that. And then you desist, you stop. You're like, maybe I'm not that. So the damage, if there's any, would be purely emotional, mental damage, because nothing has happened yet. You've just tried on that hat, so that didn't work, and took it off again. I don't think that's harmful. I think that we all explore ideas, much like with faith. We probably all tried on a place of, do I really believe? And you kind of try that hat on, and then that you land on believing, or you land on not believing, and that strengthens you. But when you get to the place of actually taking medical, hormonal, surgical steps, that's detransitioning, because now you can change. I can go back to being Jason, but I no longer have a penis, and I'd have breasts I would have to deal with. And there's a lot of things that would have implications there. That detransition is going to be expensive. It's going to have more medical risk, and certain things like the ability to produce testosterone will never come back to me naturally. And so those things are, and I'm infertile, and those things cannot be backed out. And so that's where you get a lot more devastation. And that has been a lot of the angle that I've been working at this from, is that socially transitioning is not a neutral act. I mentioned earlier that in school boards in Ontario, every school board has a policy that if a kid comes to the teacher and says, I want to transition, and this could be a young kid, this could be an old kid, but it could be an 8-year-old who says, I want to be, it's a boy, I want to be Jennifer, and be called she, her, this school will do it. But not only that, if the kid says, and I don't want you to tell mom and dad because I'm uncomfortable with it, they won't tell the parents. They'll call them that name, but when they call home, they'll revert back to Timothy. And on the report card, they'll put Timothy, and they're almost taking a step to exclude the parents. And the argument here has been, it's neutral. It doesn't matter. It's like make-believe, right? It's like the kid being a superhero in the yard. We'll let them do their thing. And I don't accept that because of what I experience and see with these children and what I experienced with myself, which is when you go down that path of starting to transition, especially if you do it when you're older, if you're 10, 12, 14, you're forming an identity around it. Everybody knows you as that person. Your teachers know, every classmate knows, and you're going to have to back out that identity. And that can be hard. There was a young adult who I worked with a few years ago, and he was, I think, 17 at the time, and he was gay. And when I say he was gay here, what I really mean is that's all he was. His identity was being gay. And I had coffee with him to get to know him once, and a few hours in, I kind of said, like, what else do you have going on besides being gay? Because that's all you talk about. And he was kind of like, nothing. Like his friends are gay circles. His life is being gay. That is his identity. And a few months later, he confides, I don't even know if I'm gay anymore. Like, I'm not sure, but I can't let go of this because this is my identity, right? That's who I am, is being gay. It's not just, I used to like volleyball and now I don't play volleyball. This is my everything, is being gay. And that's a risk when people start to go down a transitionary path. And the other risk that I experienced is when you start to transition, you want to stay in those circles where you feel affirmed, where you get the name and pronouns you want. So you're going to feel uncomfortable at home. If you get that at school with your teachers, you get that with your friends, and you don't get that with your parents, you're going to end up feeling separated from your parents and feeling closer to those other circles, which creates a division. And that's inevitable if you're going to transition and you have someone like a parent who's not affirming. But with the policy our schools have, you're not even giving those parents a chance. Maybe they would work. Maybe they'd work with clinicians. Who knows where they would go? But we're kind of just saying, nope, we're not even going to involve them. And so that's been my concern, is some of those policies around it, because I do think it's complex. I get to work with so many kids and parents now because they come in and find me, and the stories are heartbreaking because they almost always go like this. A parent calls me up and says, my kid has come out as trans. They're often, there's a shocking number of people who overlap with autism or other comorbidities. And they'll spend the first 3 minutes justifying to me, but I'm not transphobic. I love my kid no matter what. I will support my kid if they want to transition as an adult. Like I love my kid. I'm just worried because I know my kid, and I know this from when they were 7. I know this from when they were 10, and they explain to me why they have concerns this might not be right, but they feel the need to justify because they're so used to being told, well, if you don't accept, you're transphobic. Maybe you shouldn't be a parent because you don't love your kid. And it's heartbreaking.
Yeah. This is so helpful. Like probably the number one question I'm getting more recently and when I speak on the topic is from parents who have a kid who would be classified as, rapid onset, they maybe have no prior history of gender dysphoria. Then, as the kid's 15 or whatever, they're in a social environment where it is, where it's, and I'm going to be careful with my words here. I don't want to just say like trendy, but it's, it can elevate social status, say to maybe identify as trans or non-binary, and they come out, as trans almost out of nowhere, and then they're demanding parents have to affirm everything, not just abide by, but actually believe everything I'm saying about myself. And the parents like, what do I do? If I don't, I feel like my kid's just going to cut off the relationship, but I can't like affirm all these things, and like, I don't want to agree to, hormone therapy. What do you tell a parent in that situation? Like how should that parent respond to, say, a younger-ish teen who is not just coming out and identify as trans, but is kind of demanding kind of full affirmation?
Yeah, I'll
$1,000,000 question. I don't know the answer.
Well, I don't think there's one answer, but I'll answer it in a roundabout way, because I look at my experience, and as my mom and I have chatted now, of course, I didn't come out till I was 28, so I was not a teenager at the time, but she tells me, there were no signs. She had no idea that this was going on for me. And I I think it would have been different if I was a teenager now, based on everything I showed, because I kind of hear that and think, okay, that's because people weren't talking about it. But you took me to 4 counselors before the age of grade 7 because I could not be friends with the boys. There's these pictures of me in kindergarten sitting like, this. I put up a fit once because I couldn't have a particular girl shirt in grade 1 from the store. Like there was a lot of things that were there.
There were signs, yeah,
that were not being looked at. But to my mom, there were no signs. So I think in some cases, maybe there were signs. But then I also look at myself. I'm very aware of gender and sexuality with everything I go through. And I look at my daughter now, and she is very feminine. She's very girly. She continues to be obsessed with One Direction. She's actually going to see one of the One Direction guys tonight at a concert in Toronto. And like she's so stereotypically everything that world. If she suddenly came to me today and said, I think I'm trans, I would have a hard time believing it. Everything I know about what it is to be trans and everything I know about how that tends to proliferate, I of course would love her. I of course would want to explore it with her, but I'd have a hard time believing it, that it wasn't all of her friends are going down this path or something like that. So I think it's challenging. You've got to know your kid. How susceptible is your kid to following the crowd? Where are the crowds going? And mostly, what are they looking for in it? And the one pattern that I've seen, because I see a lot of kids who are wanting to or transitioning, is, does this make it better for them? Like there's one class who are happy because of it, and they really genuinely are. And there's a whole nother class who are not happy. It almost looks like it has made them more miserable. And I think in some ways it does, because then they go into the victim mentality, because then they go into I'm in this oppressed group and the world is horrible to me mindset that can exist in these spaces and can be very toxic, rather than saying, I had this deep dysphoria and now I don't have so much dysphoria, and that's so much better for me. And with the kids that I see, there's one kid in particular that my daughter is friends with, and he is biologically female, goes by a male name and pronouns, and he's at my house quite a bit. And this kid felt very different from many of the other teenagers I would see, in that he doesn't make a big deal of his transition. So we've talked about it a few times because he knows the stuff that I'm doing. And the things he's echoed to me is stuff like, well, I am trans, but it's not really an identity. It's just kind of a fact about me. And he's like, I don't really want to talk about it with most people because it's pretty unimportant, right? It's just what I am. And he's 17 now, and he's not even on blockers or hormones. And we talked about that, and he said, that's a big decision. Like, I would love it. I'm excited. But at the same time, like, I don't want to rush into these things. And very principled, very rational about it. And of all the kids I've seen that my daughter's connected to, I think he's the one I'd be most comfortable going forward with. I'm like, I see a lot of benefit. This kid is principled. This kid is doing so much better because of the transition. But then there's others who it's almost like they're more angry and they're more driven to kind of a deeper ideological position over seeing any benefit for them.
Yeah. Do you see then, I know it's, just say everything we're talking about is going to be debated, right? And heated, and people are going to disagree. So the whole idea of social contagion, do you see with teenagers, would you agree that there is some level often of social influence in the growing number of teens identifying as trans?
Absolutely. To me, it's not a debate, really. I don't look to debate people, but I struggle to see how one couldn't see that as an element.
Yeah.
I don't think it's all of it. I think dysphoria exists. I think that there's a lot of things playing in here, but I really struggle when someone tells me that they don't think that has anything to do with anything. When they tell me that, no, this many people have always been trans or felt trans, and now that it's accepting, we have this flood. I don't buy it. The same way I don't buy it with homosexuality either, in the sense that there's some people who deeply, deeply feel this in such a way that they were willing to do it when it was illegal. They were willing to do it when it was highly stigmatized. But now that it is so available, and that at least in liberal cities like where I am, it is so normal and it's so accepted, there's lots of people who are heading down that path, and they're kind of like, yeah, I'm bi. I could do either, but I'll do this way. And it's like, that's fine. I do believe that for society to work, we have to let people do what they want to do. But that's a very different bar than where it started, which was these people deeply feel this and they need this and they can't make any other relationship work. And then there's this other group that's like, yeah, I could make anything work. And since I can, I'm going to choose to take it in this way. And that's what I see with the gender transitions, but it's very different because of the medical implications we've talked about. This is not sexuality. This is body modification.
Would you, if a teenager was coming to you for advice saying, hey, I think I want to transition, hormonally and or surgically. Well, you can't give a one size fits all response. That's not fair. But in general, would you caution, like, would you encourage them to kind of wait until they're an adult, or again, I'd say,
Oh,
yeah.
it's such an interesting question, right? Because I would mostly. I think there's a lot of reason to wait until you're cognitively at a place that you can really know the decision that you're making. But at the same time, the argument for it has often been passability, especially for trans women, people like me. I would pass if I had gone ahead when I was 14. And by pass, I mean, I could blend in such a way that I wouldn't stick out. And for me, I found empowerment by sticking out. Not that I like it, but it creates that authenticity. One weird thing I discovered was when I went into this, I thought I have to pass. I'm doing this to pass, and if I don't pass, then I'll end it. When I actually got into it and found authenticity, I realized, oh gosh, if I pass, then my relationships will be just as inauthentic, because I'll meet you on the street and you're not going to know that I am biologically male, and I'm going to just make up the first 20 years of my life and be like, oh yeah, blah blah blah, and now I'm just living inauthentic relationships in a very different way, and I probably form more shame around, but I'm not really this. I can't have babies and all these things, and just to create my own different mental health situation for myself. And so that's the argument, though, is the passability of it. And I don't think passability should be so important, but I get why it is, because we do live in a world where the challenges that I do face for being trans are pretty much exclusively centralized around whether I pass or not. And so I understand why people make that so important. And I do think that the other side, if there's going to be another side, can play both cards sometimes. That we want to restrict trans women from all these places, we want to prevent you from doing all these things, and we want to make sure you can't transition young enough that you'd be able to pass and be able to do those things. So it's kind of like when you push both at the same time, it does create a bit of an inimical position. I guess I would love to see a world where we don't transition children, because we don't think transition is it's the path we go to when we need to. So we wait for adulthood, we try to avoid it where possible, but we're also compassionate enough as a society then that someone can prosper and live the way I'm living, rather than feeling that they have to pass in order to be able to live their life.
Yeah, totally. No, that's super helpful. Can you maybe summarize your 5-minute video on pronouns? Or I found it, every line in that video is so good. And so are your videos just on Twitter, or are there other places? That's just where I watch them. Like if somebody
I started on Twitter because that's just where all of these political conversations play out. I'm posting them to YouTube now on this channel that I don't really know how to use. My daughter shows me how to use these platforms, but I just kind of stick them up there because I don't know where Twitter is going. I kind of feel like it's going to fall off a cliff in the next 6 months, and I'll be like, oh, my stuff's gone. So I'm looking to get out of Twitter, but Twitter is kind of where most of my stuff is currently happening. But I do have a YouTube page under a lot of Malott that has kind of all of my video sequenced there. I would love to describe my video, except I'm actually not sure which video you're referring to, because I have 3 pronoun videos.
Oh gosh. Okay. Well, just give us your thought. Not forget about the video. Just like, what are your thoughts on the whole pronoun question? Should people use trans person's pronouns? How should trans people think through pronoun use? Is there ever a time when you would say maybe somebody shouldn't use somebody else's pronouns? Maybe like a parent with a younger kid, or
Yeah. So I've, like all of this, I've gone on these incredible journeys that never seem to end for me. So I went through that phase of I want my pronouns, and I'm going to be really hurt if I don't get them, and I'm going to blame you for it. I'm going to say that Preston has hurt me because Preston did not, call me she, her. And then I hit that place of realizing that doesn't work. That's me putting it all on you. That's me kind of saying I have a bubble here that needs to be maintained, and you're responsible for maintaining my version of reality I've created for myself. And for me, that came with a realization of the importance of free speech and of not having compelled speech. That I don't think we're in a safe spot when we force people to speak a certain way. And in Ontario, we have a law that, actually it's Canada that has a law that would require that. So if somebody doesn't call me, she, her at work, they could be gone after. And amazingly, it doesn't even have to be by me. It could be someone else who overhears it and is like, Julia goes by she, her, and you're calling, Julia, he, him behind their back. And I'm upset about that. So I'm going to go to HR. And chances are they wouldn't do anything if I didn't care. But
Yeah.
the law is written in such a way that it could lead to some really tough situations like that. So there's been a lot of pushback saying compelled speech is bad. That's not a good spot to be. And I have to agree with that, that's a problematic place to be. So kind of where I've landed is I choose to use the pronouns that people prefer because I think that's a nice gesture. I know how it can hurt. I've been in that place where it can hurt. And I don't want to hurt people. So I do my best. And I do think that trans people are better when they accept the reality, when they can work through that and not be so hurt and not be so torn down if they don't get what they want in terms of pronouns. But I also don't think it's my place to force that upon people and to make people face that. I also know that's not how they're going to learn that lesson. If they want to get to a place where they have that kind of where they can handle that, it's not going to happen by me actively choosing not to refer to them the way they want. And it's just kind of feels like a mean thing to do in that respect. And I know some people will say to me, no, it's reality, but it's accepting reality. And actually I have
You're
a friend
lying
who,
I always get like in Christian circles, they're like, well, that's lying. Like I can't, if I use somebody's pronoun. How do you respond to that? Do you feel like it's lying?
Yeah. So I had the most surreal experience on this a few months ago. I went to Ottawa, so that's 6 hours from where I live, to see someone named Chanel Fall. She's somebody in this space. She's a teacher in Canada here. She was canceled a few years ago. She posted some stuff about critical race theory in a private teachers Facebook group. This ended up getting out, and she had a complaint with the College of Teachers about it, and she had to fight this in court and the stuff she said was it was basically like about Black Lives Matters, and she kind of said, like, I think we should focus on making sure all kids feel comfortable rather than worrying about these particular issues. And someone zeroed in and said, no, like it was very extreme in my opinion. So since that time, she's become a very public voice on a lot of these matters, and we've become friends. So I went up there to record a podcast with her. So it was me and Chanel and our friend Catherine, who leads something called Lighthouse Forums in Canada, which is a network of kind of classical liberal thinkers and trying to find ways to change the way we're having these discourses. And on this podcast, they both referred to me as she, her. And it played out the way that I love my relationships playing out, which is we've never talked about it. I don't have pronouns in a certain sense. I don't list it anywhere. I've never asked to be called anything. They never asked what I wanted to be called. If people take a stance, I'm going to call Julia, he, him, whatever. I can deal with that. But they both called me she, her. We put out our video and they got immense pushback. This is kind of a waking up moment for the two of them, that they actually have a certain portion of their following that took the position of like, no, you never, ever call a trans person she, her. And so there's all of these big attacks for like 3 days. And it was weird because it wasn't towards me. It was about me. Like no one was attacking me, but they're all attacking, like I'm being listed and named as people are debating me and whether you can call me she, her or not. And Chanel came up with the best response that I've ever seen on this. And she's like, I don't walk into my friend's house and look at their potted plant and say, that is a fake plant. That is not a real plant. And I must let you know that I am not convinced that that is a real plant. Like when someone has a fake plant for decor, we all know it's fake. And we might just call it a plant. And that's how I view the space here. For both of them, they kind of clarified their position to me that one of the reasons they're comfortable calling me she, her is because they know I accept my biological reality. They know that, I know that, and they know that this makes me feel better, which it kind of does, and it's workable. And they don't really view me as a man entirely because I'm very feminine in a lot of ways, but they know I'm not biologically female, and it just kind of works. But there isn't any denying of biological reality going on there. They're not perpetuating that. And I have a lot of respect for that. And I relate it to that plant analogy of the same thing. If I was actually trying to pass off a fake plant as real to you, maybe you'd feel differently, but you're not going to come into my house either and just be like, I need to point out everything here to make sure we're on the same page. Because what if you think I think this is like, it's ridiculous. And I kind of view it in those terms of, I don't know. I think I'm rambling at this point.
No, that's really helpful, actually. I mean, I think sometimes people don't appreciate the complexity of language in this conversation too. Language is it's very socially shaped, and words change meaning, and you can even have the same word that means something different in different cultures. I mean, football in the UK is different than football in America, and pants in America is different than pants in the UK is underwear. Like I remember I lived there for a few years, and one of the few days it was over 70 degrees in Scotland. I remember, thinking, oh, it's nice out. I'm not going to wear pants. And everybody thought I just told them I wasn't wearing my underwear, and those are kind of low level, I guess, examples, but they kind of, illustrate the point. The language is flexible, and my language reflects my belief system. Right. And so I use pronouns, for me, like they refer to biological sex, but somebody else pronouns might refer to gender identity. And I might totally disagree with gender identity, whatever, but like, what are you going to do? Walk around the world demanding everybody agrees with your worldview and uses language that reflects your worldview? It's like, well, no, my language reflects my worldview. I can't change that, but I can meet someone where they're at, and language is shared social space. So you have person A over here, person B over here. Person A says pronouns match biological sex. Person B says no, they match gender identity. And we can just argue back and forth over all this stuff, or somebody's got to kind of give in and meet the other person where they're at. And so I've just taken a position, that like, as a Christian, as an act of hospitality, I'm going to meet someone where they're at, use the pronouns they want me to use, not because I need to agree with everything that comes with, but just as a gesture of hospitality. But yeah, I don't know. That's how my one caveat, I think, going back to our discussion with young teens and this social environment, I would say if you're a parent with a younger, let's just say, I don't know, an arbitrary age of maybe 15 or younger, and you suspect there might be some social influence here, they come home and say and demand to be called, different pronouns, whatever. As a parent, an authority figure, if you affirm their social transition that you suspect might be socially influenced, I think there's a place for a parent to say no to that, because the studies. I mean, if somebody is totally affirmed in their social transition, that can easily lead to hormonal and surgical down the road. And that's where I would be really, social transition is easy. You can reverse it within a second. Okay, I'm no longer, but the hormonal and surgical stuff, that's when, especially for, kids under 18, I'm going to say I'm going to want to not do something that's going to encourage that kind of decision at that age. So, and again, it's still case by case. I know some parents, the relationship with their kid is so fragile, right? Where they just need to, they might need to be putting band-aids on certain relational things just to maintain some kind of relationship. And so there is no one size fits all, but.
And that's what we do in all of our relationships, though, right? It's not a formula. It's not like you meet someone and say, this is how I do friendship. It's like, no, you meet someone and you figure out, and that's the beauty of it.
Mm-hmm.
And you touched on language there. And I think the one thing I would add is that language is also there to communicate. That's why we do it, so that we can get ideas back and forth. And in that respect, you can use that to argue either way of pronouns or trans women or whatever. And the trans women are women or not women thing, I find super interesting in that respect, because it's mostly just people arguing about, wanting their definition. And there's a researcher, Carleen Gribble in Australia, who I've connected with, and she has this great paper that she sent me and said, like, read this paper. And it's talking about language and the way that we're changing it. And her paper talked about some of the challenges of when we take away the word women and, we use birth or administrator, some of the things that can come out of that. But at the top of the paper, even just the word women, she identified how it used to mean biological sex. Then you get the postmodern deconstructive angle coming in that uses it for gender. And I think there's a place for both. It meant both previously, and they weren't separated before. The distinction didn't matter so much. Now the distinction does matter a bit more. And I don't think either one is an invalid use of the word women. You can put an argument forward for either. But if you and I are going to communicate, we have to at least be on the same page. Because if we're not talking about the same thing with it, then we can't communicate. So when people say to me, like, well, are you a woman? I'm kind of like, well, how do you define a woman? If you're going to define a woman biologically female, then no, I'm not a woman. If you're going to define woman as someone who fills that role in society, then I kind of am right now. And I don't think one definition is right or wrong. And I will happily morph to whatever definition you want in our conversation, because for me, the purpose is to communicate, not to latch on and say, this is how we must interpret that word. And if you have really strongly, I must interpret it this way, then okay, I can work with that.
That was on my list of questions I was going to ask. I was going to go down the list of all the controversial, the whole, trans women are women. So you would say, it depends on what do you mean by, if by women you mean adult female, then no.
Then I'm not that's biologically true. But, and that's where you got to look at how are we using those words though, and what's most useful. Like if I'm in a crowd and you're trying to tell someone who Julia is and point me out, like, you might say, the trans person, the trans woman over there, and that would make sense, right? Because there's 50 people, and that's a good way to identify. Just like if somebody is 6'4" or somebody is anything, you might be like the tall one, the one who's wearing the pink shirt. So I think that's fine. Right. And people get so caught up on all of these things. And I think we're also teaching that too. I had this funny experience with my daughter once where I was dropping her off at school and her friend was coming across the street in front of us with a whole group of people. And I hadn't met her friend yet. So she's like, oh, I'll make up a name. There's Jennifer. Oh, cool. Which one's Jennifer? And as it turns out, Jennifer is Black. But, she's been taught we don't say those sorts of things, right? So she's like describing her with all of these other things that are completely unhelpful because it's a bunch of teenage girls who are, all similar height and wearing similar things and all this. And then finally, when I find out which one, I'm like, you could have said she was Black, but it's like, no, we don't say those things. I have to pretend I don't see it, right? I have to pretend that I can't tell that she's Black. And I'm like, no, it's not. We're not making that her identity. We're not saying everything about her is that she's Black. We're just, that's helpful. And I view it the same way here of like, there's lots of reasons to call me a woman because there's a lot of ways where that is my role in society now. But there's also a lot of reasons not to call me woman. And let's just look at the context rather than be all like, nope, this is the answer.
In almost every conversation I have within the trans or even sexuality conversations, I feel like the first 5 minutes is, okay, well, what do you define that? What do you mean by that? What do you mean by, because so many times you get people that are just like two ships passing in the night because they're just using terms differently. And if we could just define our terms up front, we could probably have an actual profitable conversation. Okay. Another controversial question. What about trans women in female sports? Do you have opinions on that?
Oh gosh, that one. See, these are all the ones I haven't made videos on yet because I'm like, these are the ones I'm working towards.
And I'm fine if you're like, I haven't thought through it enough to give a strong opinion or.
Well, I will say on that one, like, there's lots of things I don't know. And I am not athletic. So it's one of those issues that like, not that I don't care about, but it doesn't affect me personally. I know that we all have our biases and our angles, and I'm not competitive. I would never win anything in sports. So it's not like that's not a world that I feel deeply connected to. If a trans woman can't do sports because that's basically our position, I don't have a lot of skin in the game on that decision. So in that one sense, I maybe am less empathetic towards it than some. But I've had this conversation with so many researchers and interesting people, and like the things that I hear that I think have merit is, one, there's probably not a one size fits all rule because sports are different, right? Not all sports benefit by physical strength. Some sports immensely benefit by physical strength. So those things matter. Like they play into it. And I had a conversation with someone once, and they said, when it comes to sports and prisons and a lot of the really controversial matters, like sometimes these institutions didn't work before. And maybe the problem is deeper than the surface now. And I love prisons for that example because there's big concerns with taking someone who, is biologically male and maybe is in there for rape or other like crimes like that, and suddenly putting them in, a female prison. Like that's very concerning. And we have that happening sometimes. And that scares me. But at the same time, prisons haven't worked for a long time. Like, why does anybody ever get raped in a prison? Why does anybody ever get killed in a prison? Like 60% of assaults in female prisons come from the guards. Like, why is that happening? Like the system we've created doesn't work. There's deep systemic problems. And I think this is also a problem to latch on like this is the whole problem, but it didn't work. The system's broken. And I think sports in some ways, to me, leads to that same place of like, what are we even trying to do with sports? Like, to me, there's sports for the sake of physical activity and camaraderie, and there's sports for the sake of like intense competition. And in that first category, I'm like, what's the big problem? If I was going to go and play volleyball, I would be horrible at it. And I would, I'm not a threat. And so how can you really tell me that I can't play with a bunch of women who might be the ones who I'm friends with and who I connect with? Where's the problem there? But if I'm a world-class racer, that might be a different situation now because my height and my muscle, just the bone density that I've developed having gone through a male puberty might actually have a benefit there. And then that does seem unfair. But then I go to this place of like, but isn't that the whole thing of sports to begin with? Like every man who wins races is African because physiologically they have an advantage compared to non-African men. And we know exactly what that is physiologically speaking. But we don't have white and black competitions to make sure that white men can win too. We say, no, if we're trying to find the fastest person, they happen to be African black. And that's just the way that humans are. And so in that sense too, it's kind of like, so what is the point? I think back to, do you read XKCD? XKCD comics?
No, no. I wasn't
It's a
into
super
comics.
nerdy, yeah, it's a super nerdy computer comic, but he talks about everything. Randall Munroe, the author, and he has this one comic about steroids, and it's kind of like explaining the idea of the problem with steroids to somebody who's not from Earth, and it's kind of like, like people do this thing where they have competitions to see who's the strongest or the fastest. But then some people take things that makes them too strong or too fast, and that's a problem. And when he describes it that way, it's kind of like, it is very silly that you can work out and you can do all of these things in the competition, but you can't do these things. And we've created the structure of competition, and then we've created our own rules, and then you break it when you go outside of it. And so maybe it's what we're doing that's the problem. Is it, I wonder, to a certain extent, like, is it just what we're making sports mean? But this is what happens when I ramble about a topic I really haven't thought through completely.
I love thinking out loud through stuff. I mean, and I think different that's how I am. I'll start thinking out loud through a topic, but certain personalities think, so wait, you believe that? Like, no, I'm like literally wrestling with it out loud so I can assess the validity of this argument, that argument, and I might change my mind of, tomorrow, just because I'm in the process of learning something. I'm not, there's other topics that I've done all the research. So no, I can tell you exactly what I believe. I'm 85% confident in this belief. Here's the reasons why I believe it. Here's responses to all the counter arguments. But with most topics, I have not done that level of research. So I enjoy thinking out loud through things, And
I guess that's where my head's at currently, is like, if, we have female and male sports, because if men and women ran together, then men would get all the awards and not women. But Black men get all the awards, not white men. And that's not a problem for us. So why do we have that distinction? If men are biologically stronger and bigger, why do we separate? Why do we intersect that in the way that we do? And I'm not saying we shouldn't, but it's peculiar to me in a certain sense that we do make that one matter.
I would say the one thing is, it does seem, I mean, biological sex does cut across all the way through all ethnic differences. And I don't know, I don't know enough to say it, but I think people might challenge the science behind the physiology of certain ethnicities. I don't know. I've never done any research on that, so I don't want to speak out of turn.
Either.
Yeah.
Now we're just both talking about things we don't know.
Yeah. Let's bring up something else. Let's talk about climate change or something. Okay. You mentioned early on, in passing, the Blanchard, Lawrence, Bailey kind of trio, and anybody that's done research in this area knows those names very well. Probably 90% of people listening have never heard of any of those names, but Ray Blanchard was famous for coming up with the theory of autogynephilia. Bailey kind of ran with that. Anne Lawrence, who is I think she would identify as transsexual, not transgender, I think. A trans woman, I guess, has also done research on that. So I guess I'll let you define what autogynephilia is, and what are your thoughts about that? I know it's, again, one of the many controversial topics that are in this conversation. I don't hear a lot of people talking about it as much anymore, though. But
it's out there. It's out there.
Okay.
And unfortunately, it's often weaponized, right? Like, it's.
Sure.
I guess I'll define it first. So autogynephilia was a term coined by Ray Blanchard. Of course, it's Latin term. Auto means towards oneself. Gyne is woman, and philia is fetish or desire. Yeah. So this term is referring to the love of oneself as a woman, or in other words, those who might transition because of an arousal or a fetish towards the thought of being a woman or being female, but that being the kind of root piece of it. So this is something that he came up with, and he came up with a typology as part of it that separated trans women into two categories known as homosexual or heterosexual. And this is referring to their birth sex. So homosexual trans women would be those who are attracted to men, and heterosexual would be the ones who are attracted to women. And he viewed these very two disparate typologies like that. And the ones who are attracted to men are more like women, and the ones who are attracted to women are autogynephilic. So they position themselves what they do because they're sexually aroused by the thought or the presentation of being female.
That is one of the best, clearest minute and a half summaries of it I've ever heard, I think. So anyway, go.
I spend a shocking amount of time working through this stuff. Thank you. But yeah, and so understandably, there was a lot of pushback from the trans community, because no one likes to be told that their deeply held identity is a sexual fetish. And it certainly doesn't help them to achieve rights and freedoms and the stuff that they're looking to have. but it also exists. And I say that because I know it exists, because I also know those people.
Mm-hmm.
I meet a lot of trans people, and I work with a lot of trans people now. And sometimes someone will come and say something. There's one particular individual who I was meeting with for a while, a few years ago, and they kind of described to me that they really want, you know, as they said, titties, you know, that's hot. And then just kind of like, whoa, like, you think that's what transition's about? But there are people who are in that space. So I do think that there's merit to that research.
Mm-hmm.
Where I struggled with Blanchard's work was that this was an all or nothing. It was either you're autogynephilic or you are attracted solely to men. And it's not just attracted. You meet all of these things that's very like, you are these things, therefore you're that. And that's the part that I don't fully buy.
Okay.
Because for myself, I didn't feel that. And I still don't feel that. But as always with the buts, when you really read Blanchard's work, what I described up front was kind of what we often hear, but when you really read it, love of oneself as female doesn't have to necessarily mean purely sexually. It can also mean psychosocially. And so in that sense, I do feel like this fits everything more. And I also happen to be somebody who is I'm not very sexual. I called myself asexual for a long time because I just didn't care about sex. I'll tell you a funny story. So I didn't have sex until after marriage. And for my wife to be, this was a religious thing, apparently. This is very much, you know, we don't do this. And so we weren't going to. For me, it was kind of a religious thing, but it was mostly, I just didn't care about sex. As I mentioned earlier, I had never looked at porn, had no real interest, and didn't really realize I had no interest, but I was very preoccupied with my gender and all of that. And I just had no curiosity about it whatsoever. And so we had never had sex, even though we lived together before we got married.
Oh,
and
wow.
So we're laying in bed maybe a month before our wedding. And I was thinking, oh gosh, we're going to have sex soon. Like, what if we have a baby? We were both still in school. And I thought, we can't have a baby. So I said to her, like, what if we keep not having sex after we get married? Like, what if we just hold off for a few months or years or something? And she was not happy with that suggestion. And that was when I realized like she'd been looking forward to this for years. She had been really excited and anticipating sex, and she was waiting till we got married to have sex. And I was sitting here thinking, I just don't care about it. Like and then we got married, and I've since had sex, and it's fine. It feels good. But I could do without it. Like it never mattered to me. And sexual attraction, same thing. It never mattered to me. I'm married to a woman now, and I love her. I love her as a person, though, but it's not, when people describe physical attraction to me, it's always felt very foreign, because I think naked bodies are really gross. I've asked so many people that. I'm like, do you actually like the look of like a penis or a vagina or any of this? Because I think, you know, people can look very aesthetic with clothing and all of that, but like naked people are gross. And some people agree. Some people are like, no, absolutely not. But I don't get it. So I have a really low sex drive, I would say. Well, I definitely have a low sex drive. Yeah. And so I wonder how much that plays into it too. Maybe there is some merit to Blanchard's typology, and I'm in that category, but it does manifest itself as a sexual fetish, because nothing manifests itself as sexual. Like it's a valid question.
Yeah. Because you according to, if I remember, Bailey, his book, Man Who Would Be Queen, which is kind of he kind of popularized, because Blanchard's was just kind of stuck in the halls of academia.
Then, he didn't do a book.
Yeah. But that book was, whatever you think about it, I thought it was a really just well-written book, engaging. And that was I mean, you know, again, this is something that's distant from me, so I want to be really cautious and even having any kind of opinion about it. But like you, I've met, you know, I've talked about it briefly in some talks and stuff. And in almost every case, I get a guy that comes up quietly and says that autogena, whatever you described, can you tell me more about that? And what I have is a very masculine man who's probably married, maybe has a few kids, has, you know, the furthest thing you would think from being trans, but he would say, I have these desires. I didn't know how to put a name on it. I had a good friend of mine that actually came out to be, and that's not even the right term, coming out, but I mean, he described me, he's like, yeah, that autogenophilia thing, like I wrestled with that for years. Like one of my friends, he for whatever reason, he's wrestled with kind of spikes of anxiety, and the only thing that can relieve his anxiety is putting on female, like kind of lingerie-ish kind of clothing, and that just immediately takes away his anxiety. So it's kind of in the ballpark of autogenophilia, but not fully. You know, it's just kind of, he has zero desire to transition or anything. It's not It's not even this. He said it's as much as it's female kind of lingerie. It's not. I can't put my finger on it, but it's not just sexual. It's more like a comfort. You know, it has to, like, I don't know. Is even he couldn't even really describe it, but all that to say, from my vantage point, I think you're totally spot on. 100%. There are people who experience this. I know. I mean, if you say it doesn't exist, then my friends don't exist. That told me this autogynephilia thing is what I experience. But I don't like the airtight categories. In my experience, I've just seen such a range of, even within a broad umbrella of autogynephilia, a range of experiences, and then some biological males who might check off some of these boxes who, you know, don't really, kind of like you, I guess. Like you would, I mean, the fact that you're in kind of like computer software programming and, you know, you're married to a woman, like there's some boxes in autogynephilia you would check off, but when you describe it, it's like, yeah, I don't really fit the way, you know, Blanchard and others describe it. But so yeah, I don't know, those are my thoughts on it. I think there is a utility in nakes. People would say, well, who cares? It's like, well, I think it is helpful for, again, people that have this experience, and when they find that there is a thing, that it is a name, that there is research done on it, I think that can be really liberating and helpful for people, because otherwise they're just left thinking like, I'm just some fringe human that has an experience that nobody else has. So anyway,
and then you end up in that I'm different, and the shame starts to form. But I fully agree with everything you said there, that it does exist. I don't think that the rigid categories that we're holding are useful. But where it's gone a lot recently is it's being used as a weapon. And
how so? I agree.
Yeah. So it's very easy to take that narrative and say sexual fetish, pedophile, groomer, you know, just kind of tie them all together, because they hit our disgust foundation, right? That's taboo, that's outside the normal, these are deviants, and then go down that path. So as we have a certain crowd who's looking to push back against gender ideology, which I support the pushback in some of the ideology, but as they look to do that by going after trans people themselves, it's a very easy target to say, look at these people, look at that man you described who's your friend who, you know, deals with some things this way. Well, he's probably a groomer, he's probably after your kids, blah blah blah, and the dialogue can go that way. And, you know, Twitter and a lot of those places, that's where it ends up. So the discussions, if you search autogynephilia, that's mostly what you find, is not thoughtful, interesting conversations about what's going on for humans. You just find equating it with bad sexual behavior.
Okay, I'm going to say something that's going to be, please correct me, okay, if this is just my thoughts. When I look at, like, especially the current conversation, like drag queens, even without knowing the people I'm thinking on social media, whatever, like when I look at the presentation, it just screams autogynephilia.
Have you seen my drag queen videos?
No. Okay,
I have a sequence of 2 videos about drag queen.
Because it does seem so sexual. It's all, I mean, obviously the definition is a biological male, you know, who's performing as a woman. At least, and maybe it's hyped over media or whatever, but like in almost every case, it does seem highly sexualized and very different from all the trans people I know, where they struggle with severe gender dysphoria. It wasn't a sexual thing at all, you know. But the drag queen thing, I don't know. Yeah, what are your?
I don't take a lot of strong stances on many of these issues. I try to be moderate. I try to be thoughtful. But the drag discussion is one I've come out with stronger words towards, especially for children. Of course, we have drag queen story time is a huge thing up here in Ontario. Every library has it. Really, even in our conservative towns, they have it. And I have really come out in opposition to that, because I don't think that helps anybody. I don't think that helps. The argument that they often use is we're doing this for diversity, to expose children to, but I'm like, okay, well then expose them to me, like have me come and just be me, and they'd be like, yeah, this is Julia, you know, Julia is male, but that wasn't working. So Julia dresses, like, we could have that conversation, but instead we, as you said, take the worst, pernicious, digressive stereotypes of femininity, display that. How does that help anybody? And so I don't think that's helpful. I think it hurts trans people, because that I get equated with that. After RuPaul's Drag Race came out, I get equated so much with people going, oh yeah, I get what you're saying because I watch. And I'm like, what? Like that there, it's just, it's insulting. It's unhelpful. Whether it relates to autogynephilia, I don't know. I have no idea on that, but I do think that it's unhelpful and frustrating when it gets equated.
Yeah. No, I from my vantage point, it seems like it gives trans people a bad name. And it feeds into kind of the kind of right wing, truly transphobic, maybe, assumption that all trans people are like, what you see in drag shows and stuff. And it's like, no, that's just not. So when people are kind of on the other side, making it, kind of fronting, drag shows and so on, like, I think that's actually unhelpful. But
it'd be like saying you get Christianity because you've watched Sister Act. And it's like, okay, like, that you might pick up a few tidbits of Christianity from that, but tidbits is probably even a far stretch at that point.
Yeah, that's so funny. Julia, I don't know how long it's been. I think we're coming up on two hours, maybe. We're getting close to it. So I'm going to let you go. I could talk to you for hours. Thank you. Thank you so much for the honest and raw and real and authentic conversation. This has been so enjoyable. I've learned a ton and really appreciate your voice and your honesty.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed it as well. And I will do this again sometime if you're interested.
I would love to. That'd be so fun. Yeah.
This show is part of the Converge Podcast Network.